You won't believe what I'm about to tell you, but before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss stories like this, because this one is going to leave you questioning family, loyalty, and the true meaning of love. Imagine dedicating your whole life to raising your children, working tirelessly day and night, sacrificing your own dreams so they could live theirs, only to be thrown out of your own home the moment you face hardship. That's exactly what happened to me. I was a father who had always been the backbone of the family. I worked for decades in a reputable company, earning respect and providing everything my family needed. My son grew up with the best education, expensive clothes, the newest gadgets, and even a car on his 18th birthday, all because I worked extra hours, sometimes sleeping in the office, just so he could have the life I never had. But life has a cruel way of testing you when you least expect it. After years of loyalty to my company, I suddenly lost my job. Downsizing, they said. Budget cuts, they said. I walked out of that office with a box of my belongings and a heavy heart, but what hurt most was not the job loss itself, it was what happened after I told my son. Instead of offering support, instead of standing by me, the boy I raised with love and sacrifice turned cold. He began to distance himself, making little comments about how I wasn't contributing, about how maybe it was time for me to figure things out on my own. At first, I ignored them. I thought he was just stressed, that he didn't mean it. But one evening, everything came crashing down. My son stood in front of me, his voice sharp and cruel, and told me to leave his house. He said I was a burden, that he couldn't carry me now that I wasn't earning anymore. Can you imagine the heartbreak of being called useless by your own child, the one you carried on your shoulders when he was too tired to walk, the one you stayed awake for when he was sick, the one you worked yourself to exhaustion for just to see him smile? He kicked me out that night, and I walked into the cold with nothing but the clothes on my back and a heart shattered into a million pieces. But what my son didn't know, and what no one in my family knew, was that I had a fortune hidden away, a fortune built carefully and quietly over the years. And soon, the very son who betrayed me would learn the truth in the most unexpected way. That night, as I walked aimlessly through the streets with nothing but my wallet and phone, I replayed every moment of my life in my head, the late nights, the overtime hours, the times I skipped meals so my son could eat well, the days when I saved every extra coin to make sure his dreams never went unfulfilled. The betrayal stung deeper than any words could describe, but strangely, I did not feel entirely broken. Why? Because I knew something my son didn't. For years, while I worked in that company, I had quietly been making investments. I never spoke of them. Not even to my late wife. I had grown up poor, and I promised myself that if I ever earned enough, I would put something aside so that I would never again feel the weight of helplessness I once felt as a child. Real estate, stocks, small businesses, I had diversified wisely. I wasn't reckless with my money. While everyone thought I lived paycheck to paycheck, the truth was that my fortune had grown into something far greater than anyone could imagine. I smiled through the pain of rejection because I knew that destiny had something planned for me, something my son could never foresee. But I decided not to reveal anything yet. Sometimes life has to teach its own lessons, and sometimes those who forget the hand that fed them need to learn the hard way. For days I stayed at a small, modest motel on the edge of town. The manager, an elderly man with kind eyes, didn't ask questions when he saw me come in with no luggage. He simply handed me the keys and said, "Rest, you look like you need it." I spent hours thinking, should I forgive my son, should I go back and explain, or should I let him taste the bitterness of his own choices? My heart wanted to run back, to hug him, to tell him that I was still his father no matter what. But then I remembered his words, sharp as knives, "You're a burden. You're not useful anymore." That was when I decided, would not say a word about my wealth. I would live quietly, blending into the background, and watch as time revealed the truth. Days turned into weeks, and in those weeks, I found myself walking through the city, unnoticed, like a shadow of the man I once was. But inside, I was not defeated. In fact, I felt strangely free, unchained from expectations. One afternoon, I sat at a park bench near the financial district, sipping cheap coffee, and I overheard businessmen talking about losses in the market. It reminded me of how carefully I had navigated those same storms, and how my fortune had survived them all. I knew my wealth wasn't just money, it was security, power, and above all, proof that I was not the failure my son thought I was. Still, I remained silent, hidden, waiting for the right moment. And that moment was closer than I realized, because soon, word would spread that the very company that fired me was about to collapse, and those who had turned their backs on me would come searching for answers they weren't ready to hear. The news of the company's collapse spread like wildfire. One morning, as I picked up an old newspaper from a cafe table, I read the headline that made me stop mid-breath. Major corporation declares bankruptcy, thousands left jobless. My former workplace, the same place that had discarded me without hesitation, was gone, swallowed by financial mismanagement. At first, I felt sorrow for the many loyal employees who had worked beside me, men and women with families who would now face uncertainty. But beneath that sorrow was a flicker of vindication. The world has a strange way of balancing itself. Those who believe they can cast aside others without consequence often face their downfall sooner than expected. Yet, as I digested the article, my mind wasn't on the company, it was on my son. He had relied heavily on the illusion of stability, believing that his comfortable life would remain untouched, never once considering that the foundation of his security was the sacrifices I had made. With my job gone, and the company now collapsed, his arrogance would soon meet reality. I imagined him in his large house, pacing, worrying about bills, realizing that life wasn't as invincible as he thought. Still, I did not contact him. Instead, I kept walking through the city, blending into crowds, listening to whispers, watching the desperate investors who had poured everything into that company now panic in the streets. That was when I decided to visit one of my investments. A small chain of grocery stores that I had quietly bought shares in years ago. When I entered the modest office, the manager recognized me instantly. "Sir, it's been a while," he said with respect, and in that moment, I was reminded of the double life I had been living. To the world, I was just a simple worker, a man who lost his job. But behind the curtain, I was still a wealthy investor, a man whose careful planning meant he would never truly be broken. The stores were thriving, unaffected by the chaos of the collapsing corporation, and the dividends alone were enough to keep me more than comfortable for years to come. Still, I kept everything to myself. At night, lying in the motel bed, I thought of my son. A part of me hoped he would come looking for me, not for money, not for help, but out of love. Yet days passed, then weeks, and there was no call, no message, nothing. My heart ached, but I told myself, patience. Life has a way of opening eyes, and his time would come. And it did. One evening, as I walked past a crowded street, I heard a familiar voice, my son's voice, raised in anger. He was arguing with a landlord, his face red, his posture desperate. I stopped in my tracks, staying hidden in the crowd. He was behind on rent, his expenses had piled up, and the world that once revolved around his comfort was crumbling. I watched him from the shadows, a father's instinct fighting against a wounded heart. He looked smaller, weaker, no longer the arrogant man who threw me out but a frightened boy who had bitten off more than he could chew. And though I wanted to run to him, to hold him, I stayed back. Because this was only the beginning of the lesson life had in store for him, and the truth about my hidden fortune was still buried, waiting for the day when it would rise like a tide he could never resist. The days that followed were some of the hardest for me as a father. From a distance, I kept seeing glimpses of my son's life unravel. Once, I passed by a cafe where he used to sit proudly with his friends, laughing loudly while flashing his expensive watch, the very one I had gifted him years ago. But now, he sat alone in that same cafe, his head buried in his hands, his phone on the table buzzing with notifications he didn't want to read. I could see the weight of unpaid bills and failed responsibilities pressing down on him. His pride was crumbling, piece by piece, and yet, I held back. You might think it cruel that I didn't run to him, but you have to understand, sometimes the people we love the most need to face the storm alone before they can truly appreciate the shelter that once protected them. My son had forgotten gratitude. He had forgotten humility. And I knew that if I saved him too soon, he would never learn. Still, it tore at me. At night, As I lay awake in my modest motel room, I found myself whispering prayers for him, asking for his strength, asking that he would find the courage to face his struggles without bitterness. I was not angry anymore, only heartbroken. But fate has a strange way of weaving threads together. One afternoon, as I sat on a park bench feeding crumbs to pigeons, I overheard two men talking nearby. They spoke of a young man who had been trying to sell his car desperately, almost begging for anyone to take it at half its value. They laughed about his desperation. I didn't need them to say his name, I knew they were talking about my son. That car, the same one I had surprised him with on his 18th birthday, the one that made him beam with pride, was now nothing more than a burden he was trying to escape. I wanted to cry, not because of the car, but because of what it symbolized, the fall from arrogance to desperation. A week later, destiny intervened more directly. I was walking into one of my real estate properties, a building I had quietly purchased years ago, when I saw him again, my son, standing in the lobby, arguing with the manager. He was begging for a chance to rent a small apartment, offering promises he couldn't keep. His once confident tone was gone, replaced by desperation. I stepped back into the shadows, unseen, my heart pounding. The manager, unaware that I was the building's owner, told him coldly that without proof of income, there was nothing he could do. My son lowered his head and walked out slowly, shoulders hunched, carrying the invisible weight of the world. I wanted to run after him, to say, "Son, it's me. You don't have to suffer like this." But something stopped me. I realized that the moment wasn't right. He still carried pride, even in his brokenness. And until that pride cracked fully, until he was ready to see me not as a burden but as the father who had sacrificed everything for him, I could not reveal the truth. So I waited. And as I waited, I began to prepare. I started moving small amounts of my fortune, not for me, but for the future I still dreamed of for him. Because no matter how much he hurt me, he was still my son. And deep down, I believed that one day he would understand. And one day, when he least expected it, he would come face to face with the truth that his father was never the weak, discarded man he thought, but the very foundation on which his entire life had been built. The day of revelation came in the most unexpected way. Months had passed since my son threw me out, and I had lived quietly, moving between my modest motel room and the offices of my investments. My fortune continued to grow silently while my son's world shrank into shadows of what it once was. One evening, as I was reviewing documents with my lawyer in my downtown office, a knock on the door startled me. It was the manager of one of my real estate properties, and behind him, looking broken and fragile, was my son. He hadn't seen me yet. He thought he was here to plead for mercy from a faceless landlord. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes hollow, his once sharp voice now trembling as he spoke. "Sir, I just need more time. Please, give me a chance. I'll find work, I'll make it right." My heart clenched. For a moment, I wanted to stay silent, to let him keep speaking, to see just how far life had humbled him. But then, with a deep breath, I stepped out from behind the desk. His eyes widened, disbelief washing over his face like a storm. "Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking. The silence in the room was heavy as he realized where he was, who he was talking to, and what it all meant. I walked toward him slowly, every step carrying years of love, pain, and unspoken truths. "Yes, son," I said softly. "It's me. The man you called a burden. The man you kicked out. The man you thought had nothing left." He staggered back, shaking his head. But how? How are you here? What is all this?" His eyes darted around the elegant office, the thick files on the desk, the framed certificates and deeds on the wall. I handed him one of the files, documents of my investments, my properties, my businesses. His trembling hands flipped through them, his face turning pale as the truth dawned on him. "All these years," he muttered. "You had this? You owned all this?" I nodded. "Yes, son. I built it quietly. I never flaunted it because wealth was never the point. It was security. It was my way of protecting this family, of protecting you." But when I lost my job, I wanted to see what truly mattered: love, loyalty, respect. Instead, I was cast out. Tears streamed down his face, and for the first time in years, I saw the little boy I once held in my arms, not the arrogant man who had turned me away. He dropped to his knees, clutching my hands, sobbing. "Dad, I'm sorry. I was blind, selfish. I didn't see what you sacrificed for me. Please forgive me." My own eyes filled with tears. I lifted him up gently, hugging him tightly. "I forgive you, son. Not because you asked, but because you are my blood. You are my son. And no mistake can ever erase that." The room filled with silence again, but this time it was different. It was healing. From that day forward, our lives changed. I brought him into my world, teaching him about the businesses, showing him the value of humility, patience, and gratitude. He worked beside me, slowly rebuilding not just his life but our bond. It wasn't easy. Trust once broken takes time to mend. But every small step mattered, and every moment reminded us that family is not about comfort or convenience. It's about standing together even when the storm rages. Looking back now, I realize that losing my job was not the end. It was the beginning of something greater. It was the moment the masks fell off, the moment truth revealed itself. And though my son's betrayal cut me deeply, it also gave us a chance to rebuild stronger, wiser, and more grateful than ever before. So, to everyone listening, never underestimate the quiet sacrifices of those who love you. And never let pride blind you to what truly matters. Wealth may come and go, but love and loyalty are priceless. If this story touched you, make sure to subscribe for more, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us of the value of family, forgiveness, and hidden strength.